Good evening, everyone. I would like you to welcome back to the Poison Pen Lisa Gardner, who is debuting her new book tonight, Never Tell. Yay! And for the very first time, Karen Rose, who is debuting a book, a new series rather, not her first book, called Say You're Sorry, about a serial killer working in Sacramento. So Lisa, you want to pop over here? Because I put your books kind of where... There we go.
I'm very deaf on this side.
Oh, of course you can. Absolutely.
I'm sorry for the musical chairs.
It's perfectly okay. I'm just going to lurk over here on the sidelines once we kind of get going. That's one yours. Yep. And Susan has brought a little toast for you guys.
We are color coordinated to our novels.
We are indeed. So, ladies, you're going to have to toast each other, but in any case, it's wonderful to have you here. So, a salute to both of you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Waving my microphone. Right, sorry. Here we go. In any case, you said that you were polished and well rehearsed, so I'm just going to fade into the background here until needed.
Just wanted to put her at ease. So I have known Karen for years. One of the things I always think is interesting in the thriller writer business, I guess maybe because we write diabolical books, is people think that, you know, we are diabolical and we are competing and we are cunning, and I don't know, I think we're supposed to be going around giving each other the evil eye. But I think thriller writers, we are the most fun. Totally hang with us in the bars.
We have the best story.
Yes. And we really, honestly, legitimately enjoy each other's company, and we're big fans. I adore Karen's books.
I'm not sure your microphone is
Okay, am I not on?
It's green.
I know.
If I should hold it closer, sorry.
That was the other choice.
Okay. Gosh, you and I go back. I don't want to
met you
do
in
this.
1999.
Is that it? I was going to say 20 years. So, huge fan of Karen's. She has been very gracious. We have toured together in England. We have spent a lot of quality, fun time at bars at various writing conferences. What I adore about Karen's work is great characters, magnificent police procedural. Say You're Sorry to me brings so much to the table between FBI, police, morgue, therapy dogs, cults, PTSD. I was assuming you researched that book for at least 10 years. That was my working theory when I was reading it. And yet, like all the great thrillers to me, you just open the first chapter and go. And I am one of those novelists where as much as I adore suspense, I am always reading for character. I want the people you really care about, and you want people that you might get to see again. And I loved Say You're Sorry because it's the beginning of a new series for Karen that does bring back some surprises. I'll let her talk about more. But also you can see the setup for not only do you love these people now, you know you get to see them again. And that to me is always a great read, and you close it up at the end of the night and you're very happy and you know there's more great stuff coming. So that's all the applause I have, and you should be buying Say You're Sorry. And even though she writes faster than me and longer books than me and incorporates her research more seamlessly than me, but I'll still hang with you.
I met Lisa in 1999, and then I had just decided I'd been writing in secret for 5 years. It was the first time I ever went to a conference, and I had decided at that point that maybe I could do this. You know, my husband had pushed me, and it was the last day of the conference, and I found out on the last day that I could have been getting free books during the entire conference, and of course, and I had driven, so I could have had all these free books. But I found out about the last day, and Lisa was the author I met on that last day, and you were signing The Perfect Husband, I think.
Oh yeah, so 1999, yeah.
And she had given a workshop, and she talked about the big book.
Yes.
And there was something I didn't understand, so I went up and I said, I was in your workshop, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this kid is young. You know, I don't think I was that old, but she was like, she graciously explained it to me, and I went back, and I finished my book, and I sold it. And so I'm not expecting anything. I wrote an email saying, I'm sure you don't remember me, but I met you in Chicago, and you gave me good advice. I used it, and I just sold my first book. She comes back with, if you want a quote, have your agent contact mine. So that's how I got my first quote. So there's a generosity
Absolutely.
among authors, and I've always treasured that.
Yeah,
We have used the heck out of that quote.
Yeah, so Tess Gerritsen was my first.
Oh.
I met her at a conference. Harvest had come out and done so well. She and I do happen to have the same agent, but we didn't really know each other yet. And I'm like, well, I have a big suspense novel coming out. She's like, I can't wait to read it, and I will quote for you. I was like,
And that's the way it happens. People wonder, but that's the way it happens.
It
You-
is.
You offer, and I was floored. I was simply floored. So it was my first quote. We've used it a lot, because it was a wonderful one. And the one thing I love about Lisa's characters in all of the books, first of all, they're scary, and I'm not hard to scare in books. I don't like to watch scary movies because
I can't watch scary movies.
they give me nightmares, which makes me a total
Yeah,
fraud.
you
I
got
think.
it from us. We cannot do scary movies.
No, people think, oh, you're a fraud. Well, maybe so, still. But just reading, it's hard. It's hard for me to not be thinking 10 pages ahead. What is this killer going to do? And Lisa so utterly sucks me in with the characters, and sometimes they're so scary, but they always have a vulnerability, and I love that because they are character driven. So I'm a fan, and I'm fangirling right now. But yeah.
So I would say we both like police procedural. We both
Yes.
do a lot of research. We both definitely like characters.
I like a line to the FBI.
Oh, she retired. I have to get new. I've been in. This is how you know you've been writing so long. Everyone's starting to retire. But the other thing I would say we have in common too is animals.
Mhm.
In real life, we are animal lovers.
Mhm.
They often appear strategically in our novels, and I have to say, so in Say You're Sorry, there are two amazing dogs. One that actually goes with the villain, which I thought was brilliant. I mean, you love this dog. The villain actually loves his dog. Like, it's complex characters. But then Daisy, the main character, has this therapy chihuahua something.
The Pappy Wawa.
Happy Wawa that she literally carries with her at all times to help her manage her anxiety. And I have a rescue terrier at home, and the similarities were so much I felt I was cheating on my terrier reading about your dog. But, Brutus, the little tiny little chihuahua's Brutus, is such an amazing character. You're even looking forward to scenes with the dog.
The dog was so cute, and it's interesting. I don't know about you, but I learned things from my books. Like after my second book, where the heroine she had left being a chemist to become a school teacher.
Yes.
I was like, I could do that. And so, because I had been an engineer and had lost my job after 9/11, and I became a school teacher, like a character in my books. And then, but with Brutus, I had done all this research on service dogs. I'm losing my hearing, so I'm thinking, within 5 years, I'm going to be functionally deaf, and I sleep through smoke alarms now, which is really scary.
Yeah.
Hotel rooms all over the world, and that's not a good thing. So I'm actually now looking for a service dog. I'm looking for my own Brutus. So I'm like, I could do that too. But the animals, I think, that humanize even the villains.
Yes.
They give them that little bit of vulnerability.
One of the things you did brilliantly that I always think is a sign of creating a good villain is, trust me, you don't like the guy and Say You're Sorry. I mean, you don't, not at all. But he does have a moral code. This is something I always remember from researching Ted Bundy.
Mm-hmm.
And there are scenes that really are compelling, because for as awful and terrible as he can be, it's also, that person's actually nice. I won't be mean to them. They meet the conditions of his code, which then also makes him scarier, because you're like, oh, good God, if you have a bad day and an off moment and you don't meet the code, well, then it is your turn next.
I think that the vulnerability of the villain.
Yes.
Again, this is just something. It's actually something I learned from you, because you had something on you have something.
That's why I asked the
You used to
question.
have all these tips on your website. She does, if you're a writer. She's all these tips. Do you still have those on your website?
I still have the tips on the website.
And one of them was make your villains have a vulnerability, and and her villains do, and that makes them believable, and that makes them scarier, and they're the guy next door.
Yes,
They
your
are
book definitely has that whole, it's all closer, and it is scarier for the fact that this person isn't going to take everyone.
Right.
But the ones he does take, you're sorry. You'll say you're sorry.
It is true.
So let's back up for a second. This is actually kind of fun. I always like it when I get to torture other authors. Why don't you tell us how you got in this mess? How did you become a writer?
I was an engineer at the time with Procter & Gamble, and I was traveling internationally. And this was started around 1993, and there were no ebooks then.
Yeah.
I can only pack so many physical books in my suitcase and still have room for clothes, which, you know, was kind of important because it was a business trip. And so I would read all the books before I got to where I was going, or the first day, and sometimes I'd be gone a week or two. And just these hotel rooms with TV that I couldn't understand the language except for CNN International, and after a couple loops that gets old really fast. But it was Germany, Japan, Venezuela. I mean, I was all over the place. And so I started writing because I was bored. And that's why I started writing. And I did it for 5 years, in secret, total secret. And one day my husband came home with a paperback that he paid 25 cents for. I think it was a garage sale or something.
Oh, fun.
And because he would take the children for the afternoon so that I would have time to write. Because at that point it was just kind of, that was like my Calgon moment, was sitting down with all these people who were doing all these fun things. And so he said, how to market your novel. And he said, you've been doing this long enough, do something with the book. And that was the start of it.
And you joined, we met at, it was actually Romance Writers of America. Between Thriller Writers of America, Romance Writers
Yes.
of America, two great organizations. And I mean, I have to say, even the romance folks, we're good and bloodthirsties too. But
Oh, yeah.
you do a lot of relationships in your books, but you do them very well. Like,
Thank you.
I think they go nicely with the suspense, and I consider them like the icing on the cake.
And that's true. I mean, again, and that's one of the other things that I've always loved about your books too, is that, you know, you have the characters who you feel like you could know them. They could be your neighbor. They could be, you want to hang with them.
Yeah.
And you know, and the couples are very well balanced in the books. And I think that having that little bit of relationship in there, I think it lightens the murder, because there's a lot of murder.
It's pretty bloodthirsty.
Yeah, so you know, I think we both are pretty bloodthirsty, and it's funny because I know people ask you, "You're so sweet." I think they think we're gonna be, you know,
Yeah.
or there's like Satan living under our skin or something. But you know, I'm a mom who knits. I mean, that's kind of the most dangerous thing I do. But you know, and they're like, "You're so nice." Yeah. And then my mother worries. She worries that I've been able to create all these very angry, terrible characters. She goes, people are going to think we dropped you on your head as a child. So I have to tell you, she did not drop me on my head as a child. And she'll say, how do you think them up? And I'm like, if I were evil, that's what I do.
Yeah.
It doesn't make her feel any better at all.
So this is one of the things I always find interesting, is here we are, two females, we're writing suspense. And we always have strong male and strong female characters in our books. And I get people saying, well, I don't believe that women can write strong men. And it's like, but you don't doubt my serial killers at all. You just assume I'm good at that? I mean, am I flattered? I mean, is that a good thing that we can be so diabolical?
How do you research your serial killers? Oh, well, I don't know. You know, it's just, I feel like, yes, if we're able to write a serial killer effectively, we should be able to write any character
You
effectively.
give good motivation to yours, which I always think is important. Like, he is a fully fleshed out character, and you do have moments where you not only understand, you don't agree, clearly he's bad, but you get these moments of understanding, which I think is well done. When I always think, at least when I'm approaching, you know, writing the villainy scenes, and I'm a little different in my setup, Never Tell, for me, is domestic suspense. It's a puzzle book. We have two shooting deaths, 16 years apart, the same shooter. A woman who, when she was a teenager, claimed she accidentally shot and killed her own father, but now is standing over her husband's body with the smoking gun, kind of again. To make it interesting, Detective Dee Dee Warren was a rookie detective for the first shooting. She accepted, they never found any reason to believe this was anything other than an accident. Dee Dee's concerned, because she's like, no, there's cases as a cop where you do have some doubts. She never even thought of this one again. And now, 16 years later, Dee Dee being a workaholic detective, her big fear is this woman pulled one over on her. Like, this woman really is a psychopath, was a psychopath, and, you know, got away with murder right in front of the Boston police and was so successful so that when her marriage went a little south, hey, I know how to solve this problem. I've done this before.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
So I have less like the traditional psychopath than the, you know, how well do we know the people we love? In this book, it's all about a marriage that on the surface seems very ordinary. A math school teacher who, because she was a kid when it happened with her father, there were never criminal charges. It's not a blemish on her record. It is something you can Google, because her father was a noted academic mathematician, and it's been, you know, she has that weight to going through life where her own students, if they look her up, hey, you shot and killed your father. Because that's how life works now. Whatever mistake you make, people will always find it. But otherwise, it's an ordinary family. And I always think that's kind of an interesting challenge now in this day and age of domestic suspense, is capturing what on the surface seems like, you know, a young couple about to have a baby, clearly some issues in the marriage, but oh yeah, definitely more issues. Because part of the puzzle Dee Dee's trying to decipher now too is it's not just that she shot her husband, but if he got 3 bullets, the computer got 12, which somewhat seems to suggest she hated the computer even more. And you know, you're kind of off and running from there. But I can't do as many of the moral codes. I don't know, I have one of those. Okay, so here's my question for Karen then. I actually didn't know who had done what. I didn't know if the husband was bad or good. I didn't know if the wife was a psychopath, had gotten away with it, or just was, you know, not proper gun handling skills and should go back to firearm safety school. But you like to plan, and we talked about this before. So how much do you know when you go into, because this is a very complicated book, large cast of character, multiple crimes going on. There's lots of stuff going on.
Well, I always know who did it, and not know. One time I didn't.
Okay.
And it made me insane. Honestly, I'm like, I can't do that again, because it was like I was like afraid for every page. What's gonna happen next? And it stopped being fun. It started being very stressful.
That's my process.
And everybody, we all do it differently. But yeah, I always know who did it. Most of the time, I know why, and most of the time, I know how. And sometimes I know how they get caught. But you know, sometimes I get halfway through and I get stuck.
Yeah.
Because I know where I want to go, but I don't quite know how to get there. So I go to the end, and on Post-it notes, I'm like, the villain is caught.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, this has to happen. And then I walk my way backwards to where I got stuck, and I put all the Post-it notes in order, and then I write the book.
That's great. Actually, that's quite brilliant.
It's like the flow charter in me from my engineering days.
So,
But if I had to do it like when I did, if I didn't know, like one time there was 2 people it could have been, and I didn't know if it was one of them, it was both of them, and I didn't know until the end. I was so happy when I got to the end. I was not stressed anymore, but I was really happy with the way it turned out, because it was the way I wanted it to turn out.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the way I didn't know how I was going to make it work.
So you're known for great series, generally revolving around like law enforcement. And Say You're Sorry is the beginning of a new series that you're calling the Sacramento series, because the different characters are joined by, you know, family and friendships. But like I said, we have the Sacramento PD, we have the FBI. So in the course of the series, clearly there's different areas of law enforcement you're going to cover. And this is a plan. You've got this, you know what you're doing, you have this all mapped out.
Pretty much, yes.
Do you know how many books?
Right now it's 3, but then I always break more. So.
Yeah, it's never. So
It's a sickness.
Yeah, I'm the accidental series author. So you guys will have to tell me, but Never Tell is, it's Detective Dee Dee Warren, but I'm Barbara, do you know? I don't know, 7th, 8th? I don't know how many books are Dee Dee Warren at this point.
This is 10.
Is it 10? Oh, this is the 10th Detective Dee Dee Warren novel. And then I brought back Flora Dane from Find Her, who's become, she and Dee Dee Warren are becoming a little bit of a partnership now. For Dee Dee, it's because she's clearly needs to investigate the wife, who she feels may have gotten away with murder before. To make things interesting for Flora Dane, she actually recognizes the husband. He was once in a bar with her kidnapper, Jacob Ness. So she wants to know what the hell is going on with him. But again, this was not a plan.
You didn't plan any of that.
No. And then it got fun. It realized that it all had to go back to Jacob Ness, and he spent a lot of time in Georgia, which meant I could bring back my FBI agent, Kimberly Quincy. But in my universe, there are no post-it sticky notes. In fact, I'm kind of feeling my office is a little bare.
It is the cheapest tool I have and the best one. I mean, it's like a packet of sticky notes. It's like 50 cents or something.
Okay, so I will say, just so I can be somewhat as cool as Karen, I like color-coded note cards.
I have done that. Not in a while, but I have done that before.
I do, because I often have key reveals, and often they are a surprise to me, but I need to track them.
Yes.
And when you're doing a book where you know the very setup is, it really does matter what the original shooting was when she was 16. I was smart enough to figure out I might want to get those details straight before I got off and running too far. But I still didn't know if it was an accident or not accident, because I like characters and even situations that can be ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, someone who's a good person, but maybe in a moment did a bad thing, vice versa. The other thing when you have a domestic situation, and I'm doing really more domestic thriller now, is, I mean, accident to homicide is almost a spectrum. It could be, it wasn't accidental, but maybe the father was doing bad things. It could be purely accidental. It could be someone else did it entirely, and and I like just knowing there's a lot of possibilities, and I'll figure out later which one it is. Though I'll agree with you, I do spend a lot of time firing up the computer in a state of panic.
Yes.
I'm kind of jealous to hear about this nice, smooth, here's the plan, I have a plan.
But it used to be the beginning of it that because the possibilities were endless, I would freeze on page 1. And there's like cursor, and it's almost like I don't like the cursor.
The cursor is mocking us. I don't care what any of you say, it is.
It mocks.
Yeah.
It's mocker. But yeah, I would see this hallway of doors, and like there's the lady or the tiger thing. You know?
Yeah.
What if I pick the wrong door? And then it doesn't go where it's supposed to go. So what I started doing, and I trick myself. I start with the characters.
Okay.
And I start with writing all about the different characters. And by the time I get to the bottom of it, I'm starting to write the story. And so I tricked myself past that fear of the cursor. But it took me a while to figure out that's what I was doing, because there was just this panic, because I don't like not being in total control. I'm a control freak of all of the details. And for the first time I got stuck, my husband was like, "Well, this isn't the first time you got stuck. You got stuck the last 3 books." I did? Kind of like giving birth,
Yeah.
You just don't remember how bad it was.
You try not to. It's true.
I think that was wonderful. I glued. I could do that again. But yeah, it is a process, and we all have a different process. So
Yeah, I like the moments on the book, because I'm very, like you, character driven. When the book suddenly seems to take on a life of its own, and this does make us sound like we belong in a psych ward, the voices in your head really do become real.
they do.
And in Never Tell, I had known I wanted to play around again with kind of an element from the real world, much like what you did, which is pulling in one of the things that's become very trendy right now are all these Sherlock societies. So everyday people, and often retired members of law enforcement, who form, instead of a book club, like a Sherlock society that meets one Tuesday a month and takes on cold cases or old unsolved crimes. Using the internet, if you have a retired detective, maybe you work with resources they have to see if you, as a group, can finally solve this case. It's become, I don't know, some people do book clubs and some people like to look at cold cases. So what Flora starts to realize is, so this husband who was killed was once hanging out with Jacob. She doesn't really know Jacob's life. She knows the 472 days she was kidnapped. And yes, in Boston is a Sherlock club that this is what they have been doing, is investigating Jacob. And in fact, he is a person of interest, and a bunch of different girls who disappeared in the South during the time they know he was operational. This is often also true for serial killers. There's definite names that are put, you know they did that, and then there's almost always a maybe list. Well, we're pretty sure it fits the pattern, but there's never been enough evidence to be found one way or the other. So in Flora's case, I decided she would go to, just to be ironic and to be, you know, she's angry about this, she has to meet with the expert on Jacob Ness in the Boston market, and she's already like, I am the expert on Jacob Ness. But she knows she needs information. And even when I thought of this, even in my brightest moment of almost planning ahead, I knew he'd be a computer geek, I knew he'd have a Sherlock Society.
I didn't know that was real.
Yeah, no,
I think
oh no, they become a big thing. And so, and then she goes to knock on the door, and this was kind of the fun little moment that either makes me insane or talented, we'll figure out which. He answers the door, and not only is he like the moon-faced Red Bull Doritos eating kid that lives in his parents' basement, he's highly successful, beautiful townhouse, and the spitting image of Ted Bundy. And now Flora just can't decide. And this all kind of just happened in the writing process. They do have lots of things in common. They both can talk crime forever. He is very attractive. He often seems to know exactly the right thing to say, which gets her more and more convinced he is probably Ted Bundy. I mean, so she spends most of the book. He's either the best thing that's happened in a long time, or he's clearly Ted Bundy. And what I've liked is I have no idea. I'm actually taking votes from readers. He does appear now in the next book. Again, unplanned, but he's gaining mileage now. He has traction. But I really can't tell you. So at the end of books, you guys have to start telling me, what do we think? Serial killer? Good guy? You get to vote. I really don't know.
That would make me crazy. As a reader, I love it, but as a writer, I would be like biting my nails really quick.
You know, I actually feel bad for him, because this to me is also this kind of real world situation that happens too. There's nothing this poor guy can do now that will ever be right. Mm-hmm. Like the more empathetic and understanding and like saying just like the right thing, the more, instead of, I mean, it's like, this should make him, you know, good date-worthy material. And instead she's like, see, high-functioning sociopath, knows exactly the right things to say, incredibly smart, manipulative. So, like, I mean, everything he does that's right just puts another notch in the Ted Bundy column. This guy will never get out. And I don't even know if he's a bad guy.
I always know if they're bad, but I find it a challenge to make me feel sorry for them a little teeny bit while I'm writing. But when my husband and I first got married, almost 35 years ago, he was a social worker in the Cincinnati social service system, and he was an intake. He was the guy that when you called the anonymous number to say, I think my neighbor's abusing their children, he would be the one to go
tough.
in. Yeah, it was very tough.
Tough.
I mean, he would wake up having nightmares, flailing because he was afraid. He nearly got murdered. So that was the first time he nearly got murdered in his job. So he quit. But anyway, he would come and he wouldn't tell me details, but I mean, he would tell me concepts. And I remember wondering why some people who were abused as kids grow up to be abusers, and why some grow up to be advocates.
Yeah, the cycle, you're right. It's an interesting why. Yeah.
And for me, it was the why.
Yeah.
And the fact if they do grow up to be abusers, that's bad. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, black and white is bad.
Yeah.
But it's gray how they get there.
Yeah.
And I can feel sorry for the child they were and not feel sorry for the adult they become.
Yeah.
But the whole thing about not knowing if they're good or bad, sometimes it is a black and white thing at the beginning, and it becomes more nuanced. The more I get to know them, the more time I spend in their head, it does become more nuanced.
So tell me about your process. You are a plotter. You're a book a year.
Pretty much. I did 2 last year.
show off. Still, I'll sit with you. So how do you go about this messy process?
Like I said, I usually start with the characters. Sometimes it's an event.
Okay.
Sometimes like I'll read something in the newspaper, or I did a series that had a lot to do with human trafficking. That was in my Cincinnati series, and I read an article that talked about the realities of human trafficking in the United States, and that 70% of the people who have come forward as victims of human trafficking arrived in the United States legally with a visa, but they were tricked.
Yeah.
And then by the time they are able to do something about it, they're illegal aliens, and then they're afraid.
Yeah.
And what I was shocked at is that I lived for 15 years in Ohio. Ohio is like Ohio. It's a sleepy place, and it's farmland, and Cincinnati, and it's got Cleveland, but it's mostly farmland. And it was in the top 5 states of human. I was like, Ohio, and it was because of where it was located on I-75. And when you get to
gotcha.
Ohio, and so you're like Miami to Detroit into Canada, your proximity to Canada, and just about any exit you take off of I-75, you will be in the country within 2 hours, in the middle of nowhere. And so it's extremely attractive. And so the more I thought about that, the more I thought, this is going to be the series I need to do. But with this one, the first book is a serial killer, but the underlying story is a cult.
Yeah.
And that came from, just really quickly, it came from an experience that we had when my husband, before we got married, we were engaged, like 1920, and we found out the minister of our church, and it was a very traditional Protestant church, was a fraud. And he had been lying to the church for 8 years.
Interesting.
He had embezzled almost $100,000. He said he had a PhD in counseling from Harvard, which he didn't. He was counseling women in the church, but he was counseling them to leave their husbands and they didn't to sleep with him. And it got worse and worse and worse. And my husband and his brother were the two to expose him. And we all thought, as rational people would, that everybody's going to say, he's bad, get rid of him. But that's not what happened. The church split into 3 factions, and 1/3 said, he's bad, let's get rid of him. The other third said, oh, but he's still a good preacher, and he's sorry. And let's keep him. And then the 3rd faction said, you're both crazy, and they left.
Yeah.
Basically leaving the first 2 to duke it out.
Yeah.
And it got ugly. There were death threats. My husband and his brother got death threats. And people who had been friends for their entire lives. I'd gone to that church when I was 5 years old. That church had been around for a long time. Family members fighting. And eventually he did leave, and he took that 1/3 with him.
Oh, wow.
And tried it again. He tried it again. Unfortunately, the church he tried it again with had the presence of mind to check his resume. And then you start thinking about why. Why do people have faith, in a person? What makes that happen? What's the charisma that makes that happen? Who are the people who join cults? What are they looking for?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
They're actually very intelligent and many times very well educated. They are in most ways in their lives very rational people. But the whole thing about the cult was me wondering, well, what would have happened if this guy had taken his 1/3 of the church and gone someplace very remote where he could be the king he really wanted to be. And so that's kind of how the whole cult part of this grew, and that's going to be the rest of the series.
So for me, my books are generally inspired also by something in the news, not always quite that close to home. But Find Her, or Never Tell, whatever book I'm talking about. The sales department, I just turned 100 pages of the new book because they would like to get involved with titling my books now, because the last 5 books have essentially been Find Her, Look for Me, Right Behind You, Never Tell. They're like, someone's just always missing and we're not talking about it. It's time for a change. But this book came about from an article I read in the New Yorker about one of the only female mass murderers we've ever had in the United States. Unfortunately and very sadly for us, these mass casualty events, like how we have euphemisms for things now to make them less horrifying. By and large, I think all of us have some sense of that profile. The disgruntled loner male could be of many different age ranges, sadly. But we do have a fairly recently a female mass murderer and a university professor of all things. Her name is Amy Bishop. She's from Massachusetts, which is how I found my way to the article. In her, it was probably 10, 15 years ago, she was denied tenure. I want to say it was the University of Tennessee, University of Alabama. And unfortunately brought a gun with her to that meeting and opened fire, killed 5. But what makes this interesting is when she was a teenager, and you'll see the theme now, she accidentally shot and killed her brother. And that was right outside of Boston. And so, of course, in the wake of the new tragedy, everyone was like, wait a minute, what went on with the brother then? Could that really be an accident? I think one of the things we love about thrillers is in the fiction world is trying to get some of the answers we can't get in real life, but also more perfect information. And in the real world of law enforcement, I mean, no case was ever put together, no files were ever charged. There was nothing for them to look at. I mean, everyone's like, you must reopen this investigation. And they're like, well, there really wasn't one. Her mom claimed to have seen the whole thing, vouched for it. I mean, nothing was taken into evidence. There's nothing to look at. And that many years later, the sheriff had retired. And I mean, again, it's kind of haunted a town and a community then. Was this girl always troubled? And we should have seen this coming. Or the New Yorker reporter, and he was very good about saying, no, I'm not an expert. He interviewed all the people involved, and his personal opinion, for what it was worth, is he felt the first shooting was accidental, but the trauma of it set the stage for that when her life derailed a second time, because being denied 10 years, basically the kiss of death in academics, your career is over. She basically almost defaulted to the trauma she knew. Now, whether this is true or not true, like I said, in real life, we'll never know. She really can't explain the shooting other than to say she did it. What I found fascinating is he interviewed the parents, and all these years later, the quotes they had to give when asked about the first shooting were almost verbatim and never deviated. So he's like, did they lie 16 years ago? He's like, it's possible, but if so, he's like, they have officially lied to the point even they now think it's the truth. But these quotes were so eerie to read, and it did sound like a family, whether it was purposeful or not, their way of coping with it has been to almost make it like an exercise in recitation. She was standing there. She did this. Her brother fell. It was sad.
Yeah, and that's the way. Well, and in our books, people cope with trauma very
Yes.
different ways, just like in real life.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, it is. I'm fascinated by that. You know,
Yes.
as a school teacher who often was kind of scared by students at times, you know, you kind of wonder what's going on in their home, and you know you're never going to know.
And you have a lot of great references too, because someone's always saying like, our books are so dark. You write about homicide. It's so depressing. But I personally think the great thrillers, and I think you and I, we fall under this umbrella.
I go along with that.
I like it. Our book's about problem solving.
Right.
You're not reading this book for the serial killer to get away with it. You're reading this book to see, you know, and there's a couple characters you start to really root for. And including the main character knows some self-defense because of some of situations in her life, to one of the women who's kidnapped and some very real resources she's using to try to buy time, to you have someone with PTSD in the book, you have Daisy with an anxiety disorder. What are the very real techniques they're using and that enable them to continue to cope and move forward? And I actually think that is what brings us to thrillers and balances them and makes them more fulfilling. It's not about the bad thing that happened. It's about something bad happened, and we all realize that we are stronger, more capable, perhaps have communities and loved ones, or even more supportive. And it's how you endure, survive, and in Flora Dane's own words, she would like to one day get to the point where she can thrive. I think that's what we're reading for, that kind of journey.
And I don't know about you, but I hear that from readers sometimes.
Yeah.
That because I've had a few that have had domestic violence in them. My first book had domestic violence, just like well, yours was kind of a little different.
Well, he was a still real
But still,
domestic
yeah.
violence guy.
But I remember it was one of the very first emails I got from a reader, like very shortly after my first book came out. It was a woman who basically fakes her own death. She escapes her husband, who's an abusive cop, and but he finds out 7 years later that she's not really dead, and she has taken his son.
Yes.
Not her son. It is her son, but he doesn't think of him as her son, his son. She took my son, and we have my son back.
Yeah.
And so then he was bad to start with. He gets much worse. And I got a letter from a woman who said, I also left my husband, my abusive husband, in not quite so dramatic a fashion as your character, but it was planned. It was a planned escape. And she said, I later met a wonderful man, and we've been married for 15 years. And he always asked me what it was like, and I could not tell him. But I gave him your book, and now he knows. And
wow.
I know, it's like, you get these letters, and you realize that not only have you given them hope, you've given them a voice.
Yeah.
And so, the women in your books who want to thrive, but they've survived.
Yeah.
We give our readers a voice when they can read that this character made it through. And in fact, I got one like that. The woman was like, I realized that, and it turns into all caps, "This is me!" Exclamation points.
Yeah.
I did it. I'm alive. I survived. And she hadn't realized until she read the book that was her.
Yeah.
That the phenomenal thing that she herself had accomplished. So I think that gives our readers, it gives them voice, it gives them closure sometimes.
Yeah.
It gives them hope. And those are those are the intangibles that are really everything when you think about that, the interaction that we get to have with our readers.
Okay, so you guys will have to tell me, or tell us, because you're the expert sitting out there, but I do think reading, the huge appeal is getting to walk in someone else's shoes. That escapism. And I do think as long as you're walking in someone else's shoes, you want someone you can root for. And you want those moments to breathe, and you want the moments to be terrified, because a good vicarious, a good little, while you're safely ensconced on your sofa. I have also had people say this, and I don't know if you've heard this, Karen, that we are drawn to suspense because we think of it as a kind of mental preparedness.
Yes.
We want to read about villains. We want to try to understand why a woman would become, a mass murderer. Why the guy down the street, you really should have been looking in his basement. Why that couple behind those closed doors when the police are coming in the middle of the night. There's a sense that we could recognize the signs.
And forewarned is forearmed. It makes us feel safer.
If we really knew what a predator looked like, then we ourselves, and you have a great line in there, and I thought this was brilliant, with Daisy and Say You're Sorry. It's not just that the opening of the book, she saves herself from clearly a guy who is going to be a serial predator. But she makes a big distinction, and this to me is good real world knowledge. It's not that she's taken some self-defense classes, but she takes them all the time. Because if you're a female or anyone out there who wants to feel more prepared, you can't just do it once. You have to get the muscle memory embedded. And that the more and more you practice these things, should the worst case happen, yes, you're afraid, but instead of locking up, you're going to fall back to the training. And I love the fact that you took something very practical, because I myself did the one kind of requisite living in a big city self-defense class, but you're correct. It's taking it again and again for all of us, for anyone interested in self-defense, who has kids going off to urban colleges. I have a teenage daughter, these are things you worry about. The fact that, your nightly entertainment can leave you with such a great practical piece of advice is something I really enjoyed.
Thank you. And one of my very good friends was my karate teacher. She's now in the Navy, but we did self-defense. and because it was something I did worry about. Again, I traveled a lot by myself, you know, and I was born deaf in one ear, so I've never really been able to hear what's around me. And when you,
That's scary.
it is, I mean, because and there's like this whole part of the world that I don't know is there. And you could come if you came up. I mean, I would like get out of my skin if somebody came up behind me, you know, on that side. And I wanted to know. I wanted to get a few tools, you know, because I was never going to be a black belt. I knew that. I'm not athletic, but I wanted a few tools. And she actually taught me a few tools, and my husband had to learn the very hard way. Don't sneak up on me in a crowd and kiss me on the back of the neck. He's like, it's just me. And I'm like, I didn't know that. I mean, I was able to pull it, you know. I was able to pull it every time but once, you know, because he scared me. And then our daughters are like, yeah, Dad. And he's finally getting it. But one of the things we did is an exercise. And she had an assistant who I knew this guy. He was one of my karate teachers too. I trusted him. But we had to lay down on the floor, and he kind of came down like he was gonna, you know. And in that moment, I froze.
Sure.
Because I knew him. I knew he wasn't going to hurt me. But there's that moment where you freeze. And that's when I was like, okay, now I understand why I have to do this again and again and again.
So,
because then it's muscle memory,
yeah.
even when you're like terrified out of your mind.
So one of my favorite parts about book tour is it not just that you get to travel with cool other authors and talk books, but you get to learn great things to read. So last year at this time, and I'm gonna grab you, Barbara, you introduced me to one of my new favorite series. But I can never remember. The woman's a forensic accountant, travels the world, half.
Oh, it's A Believe, written by Ian Hamilton from
Ian
Toronto.
Okay.
Aren't those great? They're
Yes.
going to be television.
Oh, I can't wait. So, like, from Barbara, I always get the best book suggestions because while I'm here, my goal is to buy a few more. And that's what I get to read for the rest of the series, and I'm for the tour, and that's what I'm excited for. So let's see. Karen's also one of my favorite authors, Karen Slaughter. We'll make it easy for you. Karen's and Lisa's. Lisa Unger, Lisa Scottolini, Lisa Jackson. We can make it Gardner's, make Gardner, who was here last year. Who do you like to read?
You know, I actually don't read a lot of thrillers because when I'm done, I kind of like want to be done. But when I do read thrillers, I read yours. I read Michael Connelly.
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the things I love about Dee Dee Warren is that she stays fresh. You know, that was one of the things I've always kind of been worried about if I wrote a book with the same lead character, that I wouldn't be able to keep that freshness to it. But that's something that you managed to do, and I really do like that. And it's just kind of the same with Harry Bosch.
Yeah.
And he's so
He's
flawed.
the best character.
And you're just like, no, don't fall in love with Harry, run away. Because everybody who falls in love with Harry, it just never works out. You're just like, no, Harry, don't do that. And then because I forget, I'm a writer, and I think that's anybody who can make me forget to look for all the places where I might have done something differently that sucks me in. And yours do that. Michael Connelly's do. I've like Lisa Jackson.
Yeah.
What is her name? Kendra Elliott.
I don't know Kendra Elliott.
Kendra Elliott. She's
yay! New author for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Very smart. Very, very smart books. A lot of
Series.
She does have some series.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not long series,
Yeah.
and I don't remember if she has like a recurring character or not.
Okay.
Kendra
Elliott.
Yeah, Kendra Elliott.
I don't know about you guys. I have to keep an ongoing list on my phone.
And there's Brenda Novak. She's got a new one about
Absolutely, Brenda's fabulous.
Brenda Novak. Alison Brennan.
Yep.
Let's see. I'm trying to remember who else.
Alafair Burke.
Yes.
See, while you're here, I bet you.
And Alex Kava.
Yes, and Alex Kava.
I like her because she's my height. I like her books too.
Oh, well, see, we're sitting in the right place.
Oh gosh.
All right, so from the studio audience, what great book have you read lately we should know about? You guys all read some of
I
your
just
own.
finished your binder.
I know that one.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Well, past tense, The Child, that was awesome.
Lead's always good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read a good book, but it's not a mystery.
It's okay.
Storyteller's Secret.
That sounds like. Wait, hang on. We'll get to that. But Storyteller's Secret. That sounds
It's fabulous.
okay. And it's not a mystery because it sounds like it.
No, it's about a family there, the woman that comes from India. It's an Indian author. What is his name? We just looked it up. And
The Storyteller's Secret.
the woman goes through many miscarriages, and her marriage sort of falls apart. And she gets a letter. Her mother gets a letter in the mail saying her father in India is dying, and she won't go, and she doesn't understand why her mother won't go. So she goes to try to find herself, and back and forth.
I like those kinds of books.
Fabulous
Personal
book.
discovery.
It's a fabulous book.
I downloaded, Delia Owens' The Crawdads.
Where does the
Oh, I want to.
crawdads
Yeah, I want to read that one.
Yeah, everyone says, yeah,
Did you read it?
that's tomorrow on the plane.
Oh yeah.
But yes.
I just want to read that.
And then,
Terrific book. I actually talked Putnam into sending her here.
good for you, because everyone's I mean, like, that to me feels like the book of the moment.
Yeah.
And then The Silent Patient.
I
The
saw that
silent
one.
patient is got kind of a gimmick to it. I mean,
Oh.
it's like the ultimate trust no one, unreliable narrator.
Yeah, I'm
so
not in
Dunia's
love with
book
the
is a lot more
unreliable.
authentic.
Yeah. Okay, and then wait, there's a suggestion back here. Another author. Yes.
Joseph Binder.
Oh,
Oh,
he's
yeah.
excellent. Judgment is out now. And I love the Greg Hurwitz Orphan X. The new one came out in January. And I have to admit, because at one point in time Bradley Cooper had option to develop it, there is a new series in production now. But for the movie, I do picture him as Bradley Cooper, and it adds to the reading experience. That's just what I
Not an orphan. You know what? Let's take a moment and wave goodbye to our Facebook audience. And thank you very much for
Goodbye,
joining us.
Facebook
We can all say
Oh, I'm glad I didn't know that was happening. I would have been